Hola, Denise. ¿Cómo estás? Hola, Denise, ¿cómo estás?
Bom dia, Rafael.
Bom dia, Daniel. Tudo bem?
Tudo beleza?
Hoje deu tudo certo aqui, as conexões.
Ótimo.
E hoje todo mundo vai falar inglês.
Ah, é?
Inglês assim, não vai ter ninguém espanhol, ou é português ou inglês. Hoje não teremos...
Perfeito. Para mim, na verdade, é bom quando alguém fala espanhol, porque 2 horas é muito tempo para fazer sozinho. Aí dá um descanso, né? A voz quase não aguenta 2 horas seguidas, mas vamos lá.
Com certeza.
Bem lembrado, eu vou encher meu copo de água, já volto.
Beleza. Bom dia, Julice, tudo bem?
Tudo bem, eu estava preocupada se a minha câmera ia funcionar, porque outro dia deu problema, ontem deu problema, eu pensei que fosse alguma coisa do meu computador. Oi, Denise, tudo bem? Prazer.
Olá, Denise, como estás? Hello, Nathan. How are you?
Hello, good.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
So much. We will have translation to Portuguese into English, and Danielle will be the translator. This will be Julice Salvagini from Fairwork, Brazil, and Denise Kasparian. I think she is entering now.
So how will that work? Will I go to a different room, or will it be on screen, or what's
Yeah, there's a button from below, like interpretation or something like that, so you can choose English or Portuguese. Daniel, você conseguiu entrar como tradutor?
Não fui designado ainda.
Deixa eu colocar aqui, que talvez tenha dado algum...
Good morning, bom dia.
Vê se você conseguiu agora.
Ok.
Olá, Denise, como estás?
Tudo bem, with some problems with the computer, but trying to solve them.
It's okay. Thank you for having us too. In a Saturday, and I don't know in US if it's like spring or summer, because here in the South it's almost winter.
Yeah, no, here it's spring. It's a nice spring day.
We are waiting for Callum. Cant. Rahel Shoots, unfortunately, she had an unexpected event earlier. She woke up very sick, and unfortunately, she won't able to join us today, but it's okay. Maybe she will join in the next event.
Who was that you said? Who was sick?
Rahel, she's
Rahel, okay.
Rahel. Hello, Callum. How are you?
Hi, everyone.
Thank you for accepting the invitation one more time and collaborating with us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah.
Great to meet you, Callum. I really enjoyed your book.
Oh, thank you. That's really kind of you, Nathan. Yeah, nice to meet all of you guys as well.
Thank you. We are waiting 2 minutes and we will start soon. Bom dia a todo mundo que está chegando aí. A gente começa daqui a pouco.
Hi, Callum, are you from Oxford? Are you from Fairwork too?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're from the Brazil team, right?
Yeah.
Cool. It's nice to meet you.
Representing the Brazil team. Yeah.
Yeah,
Hi,
I know.
Nathan. Hi, Denise.
I've been saying to Raphael, I need to come up with a reason as to why I have to go to Brazil and see you guys in person. I'm not quite sure what the reason is yet, but I'm sure I'll come up with one.
Okay.
And I will go soon to the UK to a workshop with Jamie at the Open University in July, I think.
Oh, cool. Well, yeah, you'll have to stop by. Oh, you'll be in London, won't you? So yeah, just pop by and say hi.
Great. Well, we'll start. We are at the time. You can choose translation in English or Portuguese. I will talk in Portuguese to our Brazilian audience. So feel free to choose the interpretation here. Bom dia a todo mundo. Este é o terceiro painel Cooperativismo de Plataformas e Políticas Públicas. O meu nome é Rafael Groman e nós estamos aqui neste evento apoiado pela Fundação Rosa Luxemburgo no Brasil, apoiado também pelo projeto Fairwork e pelo Plataforma Cooperativism Consortium. A gente tem discutido como é que o cooperativismo de plataforma pode ajudar a fomentar políticas públicas, especialmente em um país como o Brasil. A gente já teve um primeiro painel com cooperativas de entregadores e motoristas de diversas partes do mundo, especialmente da América Latina e da Europa. A gente teve na última sessão sobre... trouxemos Igor Calçada, trouxemos a Nadine Chama do IT for Change e outras iniciativas para pensar tanto as cooperativas de dados e a relação disso com o cooperativismo de plataforma de uma maneira mais geral e de que maneira a gente pode pensar quais políticas públicas já estão existentes no cooperativismo de plataforma. E hoje o tema é trabalho decente e governança para o cooperativismo de plataforma. Quais os desafios que a gente tem em termos da governança para o cooperativismo de plataforma, seja no sul ou no norte global, e quais os desafios que a gente tem em relação à garantia de trabalho decente no cooperativismo de plataforma e os desafios que o próprio cooperativismo de plataforma enfrenta no mercado. Isso considerando, inclusive, tentativas de fair washing por parte de empresas que muitas vezes tentam colocar modelos falsos cooperativos ou cooperativas falsas para trabalhar. Isso tem um histórico no Brasil, e isso acabou, enfim, toda a legislação tendo a ver com essas chamadas falsas cooperativas por aqui. E a gente tem a alegria de receber hoje para essa conversa Callum Cant, que é pesquisador de pós-doutorado no projeto Fairwork na Universidade de Oxford e autor do livro Writing for Deliveroo. Nathan Schneider, professor de Media Studies da Universidade de Colorado Boulder, nos Estados Unidos, e autor de alguns livros, entre eles o livro Everything for Everyone. Denise Kasparian, da Universidade de Buenos Aires, Research Fellow do Plataforma Cooperativismo and Consortium, lançou recentemente um relatório sobre os desafios de implementar cooperativas de plataforma de maneiras territorializadas. A gente publicou nessa semana um artigo no DigiLabour dela, em português e espanhol, falando sobre isso. E a Julice Salvagini é professora da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, no Brasil, membro da equipe do Fairwork Brasil, e uma pesquisa financiada pela FAPERGS, Fundação de Apoio à Pesquisa no Rio Grande do Sul, sobre o movimento dos trabalhadores sem teto no Brasil e o cooperativismo de plataforma. A gente pede desculpas à professora Rahel Süß, da Universidade de Humboldt, Berlim, teve um evento inesperado hoje, acordou doente e não pode comparecer. Cada um dos nossos convidados vai ter, em média, 15 minutos para comentar, e depois a gente recomenda que até vocês façam perguntas entre vocês mesmos. Em seguida, a gente vai conversar com a plateia e pedir para vocês fazerem perguntas pelo Q&A. Bom dia, então, a todo mundo. Muito obrigado pela presença. Passo a palavra para o Callum Cant, que é pesquisador do projeto Fairwork, especialmente no Fairwork for AI, focando em frameworks regulatórios para inteligência artificial no ambiente de trabalho. O primeiro livro dele é o Writing for Deliveroo, e isso e agora ele está no projeto Fairwork, e no livro Writing for Deliveroo ele já aponta alguns limites do próprio cooperativismo de plataforma, e é um prazer estar aqui com o Callum Cant já em algumas dos nossos diálogos. Obrigadão, Callum, pela presença. O palco é todo seu.
Thanks, Rafael. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, the book is quite critical of cooperativism. I think what I want to share today is some potential changes in my thinking over the opportunities presented to us by cooperatives.
Mudanças no meu pensamento das oportunidades de cooperativas e algumas das formas em que essa análise inicial minha era negativa em excesso. Mas, ao mesmo tempo, eu quero deixar claro que eu acho que há limites significantes à abordagem cooperativa e a forma para lidar com o modelo de cooperativismo por meio de mudança política, pela batalha política. Então, acho que
on political change is the dominant way in which we circumnavigate some of the problems presented to us by platforms like Deliveroo, Uber, etc. So in order to start this discussion, maybe let's zoom out a bit. I want to talk about the food crisis in the UK. As Rafael said, my first book was on Deliveroo, so I'm very much interested in approaching these questions from the perspective of the whole food system. In the UK, agricultural fertilizer prices have gone up by 196% year on year, right? So this means that all of the crop grown in the UK, at the moment we grow about 54% of the food eaten in the UK. All of that is going to be dramatically more expensive, and the yields are going to be significantly lower. At the same time, for most consumers, energy prices are now going up by about 54%. So that means a doubling of that price, which is a really significant cost. Now, this is taking place in a context where already for the last decade, there's been real wage growth has been basically non-existent. We have seen a working class fundamentally placed into more immiserating work, more difficult work, There's been an ongoing process of work intensification and the elimination of a number of fundamental rights. The gig economy and bogus self-employment has grown very rapidly. And all of this means that, you know, from a low baseline where things were already quite bad, things are poised to become very significantly worse in the UK in terms of food systems and people facing food insecurity. So we actually have at the moment 2,500 food banks across the UK. I don't know if the term food bank translates directly, but these are basically emergency facilities where people who are otherwise facing the possibility of starving can gain access to the food they need to live. Now, the UK only has 1,500 McDonald's. So we have 1,000 more food banks than we have McDonald's. There are food banks literally everywhere. They're run by charities, they're unsupported by government. There is no real safety net for the people who have to use them beyond charitable provision. There's one just on the other side of my estate. I can almost see it out the window here. So this is kind of where we're at. Rapid increases both in the prices influencing consumers and the prices dealing with fertilizer for food producers. And already we're starting from a baseline where a lot of people are insecure in their access to food. There are currently about 7 million people in the UK who regularly miss meals, right? Now, the population of the UK is only, you know, 66, 68 million. So we're talking about 10% of the population, and many million of those are children, obviously. So the UK food system is comprehensively broken. Decades of kind of neoliberal reform and assaults on working class well-being have led us to a point where now, I was in a meeting with some MPs, politicians yesterday, and they were really desperate about the circumstances that were going to start to affecting their constituents and really aware of this being a profound and deep crisis. There are people who are starving to death in one of the richest countries in the world, and that will only continue to escalate. So when we're talking about cooperatives, when we're talking about the necessity for political change, when we're talking about the circumstances we live in, that's where the food system is at, right? We are in an extreme period, I think, of crisis, and we have to begin from that premise that, particularly in the UK, although I expect it will be similar for many of your national contexts, things are just not working in the provision of food right now. I know in the US you've got baby food shortages, right? Like these kind of profound things are going on in the international economy as a result of the situation in Ukraine and ongoing climate change that are undermining our global food networks. So we need to think of our response in that context, I think. Now, as food infrastructure breaks down, as the provision of food becomes harder and harder and food insecurity grows, I think how I've started to view the role of platform cooperativism is as part of what a state crisis response could look like, right? In the UK, we have a number of examples of state crisis response on this kind of level. During the Second World War, there was a thing set up called British restaurants, right? Now, this is a slightly strange name, but they were essentially public canteens where people could eat for heavily subsidized food that was nutritious and could kind of keep them going. So this was a wartime emergency measure that has, I think, some resonance for us now as we look at coming out of a pandemic and facing a real crisis of food availability. Now, in the book, I argue that Deliveroo, food platforms, last mile delivery services are fundamentally really care processes. When you're delivering food to people who are vulnerable, people who are exhausted, people who are emotionally upset, all of these things, I think it makes sense to me to reframe takeaways in that context, that takeaway food, delivery food is not just a luxury item. Often it fills the gaps left behind by a failing food system for those obviously who can afford it. So now, as we enter this period of crisis, I think one of the things I really want to stress is that cooperatives can be a modality through which we deliver emergency food. So it can be a way to get food to people who are, for instance, aging. We have a very elderly population in the UK, or people who are socially isolated, or people who are struggling to access food in other ways or have other barriers to taking part in social provision. Now, that has to be the case, not just through market competition, right? And I think in the UK, we have examples of some food cooperatives like Wings, for example, in London, which they do delivery and they work as kind of market competitors. They go up against Uber Eats, against Just Eat, against Deliveroo, and they try and compete with them on price and in the open market. Now, there is obviously a role for that, but I think it's likely that these platforms will only remain very, very small. These cooperatives will not be able to grow significantly in the context of a very, very difficult urban food market. What we need instead, I think, is to look at the ways in which cooperatives like Wings or similar alternatives could work in a space that is opened by the state.
Trabalhar num espaço que se abre pelo Estado. Como que o Estado pode agir para dar espaço para cooperativas agir? Se trouxermos algo como aquele programa durante a guerra, o modelo de restaurantes públicos, onde criaremos uma rede de hubs, onde estamos usando provisões estatais para dar alimento a preço baixo. Como podemos incluir as cooperativas para dar entrega nisso, ou dar a eles um pouco dessa infraestrutura de produção, ou como podemos garantir que o Estado está abrindo espaço para criar oportunidades para que essas plataformas concorram de maneira mais ampla. Eu acho que isso é um dos passos principais, e não achando que cooperativas terão um impacto na economia sem concorrer ou concorrendo no mesmo território econômico das plataformas existentes. Precisamos ver como vamos pesar a balança, como vamos...
The platforms not only are trying to compete with huge venture capital funded services, but are also being supported by the state and used by the state to provide an alternative option, an alternative approach to a crisis. Because fundamentally, if we accept these are care platforms, if we accept that we're in the middle of a crisis, that we need a radical expansion of state provision, this kind of modality is going to be essential, because ultimately in the UK, our urban infrastructures for accessing food have broken down. You have areas of food deserts where, for instance, people without car transportation can't get to major supermarkets. If I didn't have a car, I'd have to walk about half an hour to a supermarket and back every time I wanted to go shopping, right? So this breakdown in infrastructure is creating this need. And, you know, last mile delivery, the popularity of platform delivery services, it's not coming out of nowhere. It's not just a luxury demand. It's a knock-on effect of changes in the pattern of urban infrastructure. And so we had to see it as in many ways, essential service, an essential modality that can be added into crisis response rather than just a luxury, or platform cooperatives as organizations that should just compete on the open market with other similar platforms. Instead, we have to think about leveraging the state and state power to actually create space for the growth of democratic worker-owned alternatives. And that, I think, enhances and makes use of the possibilities of cooperatives to be a radical alternative, where workers are given democratic control over their work, where workers have the opportunity to earn decent wages, experience decent conditions, and not be relentlessly exploited, where trade unions are treated not as kind of enemies, but as organizations to be partnered with. I think that kind of space creation is going to be a really essential step. However, the challenge for us, and I probably want to end on this note, although it might not be the most optimistic thing in the world, the challenge for us in the UK is that actually the political agency required to force the state to act in this way is quite hard to foresee, right? This is obviously like a necessary next step. This is a role that platform cooperatives could play. It's in many senses, I think, not even a politically it's not politically difficult at the moment to say the state should step in to stop people starving. Hunger is a political choice, and it should be easy to win popular support for these kind of measures. But at the moment, we face a real problem with a lack of progressive actors in the political sphere, following the defeat of Jeremy Corbyn as Labour leader, which some of you may have known. The party has tacked very hard to the right, and now mainstream British politics really includes no one to the left of Margaret Thatcher, which is a bit of a problem. But that's now kind of the crisis for us. So I think, as ever, there's a kind of a tension here between what's necessary and what we want to do and what we're able to do at the moment. But as part of a Right to Food campaign, which is currently working with some of the major unions in the UK, we're looking at developing some policy papers that make very clear that there is an alternative here if people want it, right? If the government wants an alternative, we will have come up with the plans, the ideas that are there and available. And one of the major roles of co-ops in those plans, in those kind of detailed granular ideas for what we can do next, is as that emergency delivery option that can replace or expand who can be covered by this kind of provision. So yeah, that's what I want to say.
Muito obrigado, Callum. Sua ótima
Thank you, Callum.
apresentação. Agora vamos para a apresentação da Denise Kasparian. É uma alegria receber Denise por aqui. Ela é pesquisadora do Conselho Nacional de Investigações Científicas e Técnicas, com sede de trabalho no Instituto de Pesquisas Gino Germani, na Faculdade de Ciências Sociais da Universidade de Buenos Aires, na Argentina. E é também Research Fellow no Instituto Institute for the Cooperative Digital Economy, na New School, nos Estados Unidos, pelo segundo ano consecutivo. Ela publicou nessa semana uma versão reduzida do seu relatório final do Fellow, em português e inglês, chamado Implementação Territorializada de Cooperativas de Plataforma no site do DigiLabour. É um prazer estar aqui com a Denise. Denise, o palco é todo seu. Obrigadão por ter vindo aqui com a gente.
Bom dia, Rafael. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Rafael, could I share a presentation?
Yeah.
Yes.
You can share, please.
Okay. Okay. Let's hope this works.
Yeah, it works. You are muted now. I think now, yeah, you can try to talk.
I don't know why when I heard it. Let's try again.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry for the delay. So,
Yeah.
no, I don't know why it won't work. So I will talk and I will read my notes without sharing.
Denise, if you prefer, you can send the file through the chat, and I can share my screen.
No, don't worry. I can read and
okay.
talk and without the presentation. I hope you can follow.
Great. Thanks.
Well, so first, good morning, good afternoon again. Thank you very much, Rafael, for the invitation. And I am really, really honored and delighted to be on this panel with such valuable colleagues, and very nice to meet you. To begin, I wanted to share with you the situation that prompted my research question. Perhaps this way it's better to understand my question. It was the beginning of the pandemic, and I was taking the opportunity to attend virtual panels outside Buenos Aires, something quite impossible before the pandemic. In that opportunity, I was attending a panel about cooperativism. One of the speakers described the success of an European cooperative that had achieved global scale. What struck me about his description was that co-op had expanded to different countries, notably outside Europe, through the creation of productive units which were not cooperatives. That is to say, while the business internationalized, the cooperative didn't. The speaker set forth some reasons to justify the difference between the cooperative and the community of origin, and the non-cooperative foreign subsidiaries. While these reasons could be valid, I think they don't exclude other ways to internationalize cooperatives, other ways to expand businesses with democratic governance and economic participation. I thought this point deserved attention even more when it comes to platforms for two reasons. First, because one of their attributes is that, at least concerning software, they are easily scalable. And second, because they need to grow to gain power. And let me add a third element. I think it deserves even more attention when you do research in Latin America, because platforms are usually created elsewhere and then land here. So today I would like to share with you the Argentinian implementation of CopCycle, which I think is useful to reflect on this platform co-op's strategy to grow. I think the question that best summarizes this research is how can platforms not simply scale businesses and softwares, but also democratic governance and decent work beyond the European borders. So during last year, as Rafael just told, I carried out research in the framework of the Institute of the Cooperative Digital Economy of the New School at the University of Buenos Aires. From a sociological and transnational perspective focused on social change, I had two objectives: to analyze the feasibility conditions for the implementation of CopCycle in Argentina, and to identify the contributions of the local process to the platform on the whole. I guess most of you know what is CopCycle, but let me explain briefly what is this platform co-op. CopCycle is a federation of bike delivery co-ops, as well as a digital cycle logistics infrastructure. Currently, the federation has about 70 member collectives, the vast majority of which are in Western Europe. These collectives use the cycle logistics software that enables them to manage their deliveries and to offer the service to restaurants, shops, and different clients. The open source has a copyleft license, so regardless of who created it, anyone can execute it, use it, and modify it. That said, CopCycle adds a twist to this kind of license. It claims that the software has a copyleft license, so not copyleft, but cooperatives license, which guarantees its use by cooperatives or workers' collectives only. I think that, well, here there was a chronology I wanted to share, but I can tell it, because I think that the chronology of CopCycle's governance model is interesting to discuss today, because it started being non-profit association made up of volunteers in 2017, and now this organization is transitioning towards a multi-stakeholder co-op. So in 2017, it started as an association of volunteers. 1 hour later, this association organized the first annual assembly, and this was another step. Then, to ensure democracy, this founder association started a governance transition and formed the Federation of Couriers Cooperatives in 2019. And also, there was an intention to professionalize the organizational structure, and hence 2 or 3 roles of the federation started to be salaried. Then in 2020, to start talking about Argentina, in 2020, the Argentinian Federation of Technology, Innovation and Knowledge Worker Co-ops, FACTIC, the name, started the local implementation of this platform. That same year, this federation, and while I heard Callum, I wanted to tell him lots of things about the process here in Argentina. That same year, this federation gained the first state grant to develop the software, the software adaptations for the localization. For example, FACTIC had to change the gateway and also set the local taxis for the co-op to function to be operative here. And that same year, in 2020, the federation obtained a second grant to accompany and strengthen the first courier co-ops that would use the platform. So this is an important thing I believe, because the process was here in Argentina promoted by a federation of worker co-ops, of tech worker co-ops, together with the support, the economic support of the Argentinian state. So while the project moved forward in Argentina, the FACTIC team was always in touch with the European founder group, which provided support and guidance. However, the formal admission of the Argentinian project into the network of CopCycle did not arrive until mid-2021, let's say 1 year later. Why? I think this is another interesting issue of this local implementation. Why? Because like in other countries in Latin America, many workers in the delivery sector in Argentina use motorbikes, while CopCycle in Europe is committed to bike delivery as a way of contributing to the decrease of pollution. So here there was like a crash of values that could have caused the bifurcation of the regional projects, and I believe that turning them weaker. So instead of this crash of values, FACTIC elaborated a proposal for a transportation transition of 3 years for the Argentinian worker co-ops. And after the circulation of drafts, comments, exchange, debates, and also voting by Lumia, the Federation in Europe approved this transportation transition, and the Argentinian project formally got into the network. So currently the socio-technological adaptation of the platform is advanced. So the software is ready, and the legal documents and agreements also are ready. Besides this local implementation, the Federation FACTIC has had a prominent role in the creation last year of CopCycle Latin America. It was created last year, and this space includes experiences from Argentina, Chile, Mexico, and Uruguay. So lots of countries that are starting to getting together in CopCycle Latin America, which has a close link relationship with CopCycle in Europe. And continuing with these changes in the governance model, in 2021, the career collectives in Europe chose their first board, according to the principle one cop, one vote. And I think it is interesting to notice that this board is not only workers from the careers co-ops. It has 10 rows, primarily from the delivery co-ops, but it also has members of the association, of the founder association, which have advisory tasks, and also has a coordinator representing the employees of the federation. So it's an interesting model to think about governance in platform co-ops. I would like to share with you some of the factors I identified are important in the local implementation of CopCycle that I think are positive for the local implementation. The first point, the most important thing, are the resources at the starting point that the Argentinian process inherited from the European experience. The most important thing being the open source software. Also, I identified 3 contextual conditions that are important to understand the possibilities of CopCycle in Argentina. First, the cooperative legal framework in Argentina. Here we don't have a multi-stakeholder model, but we have some geographical districts models that could help, that if co-ops hack them, they could help to organize platform cooperatives with different types of members. The second contextual element I think it's positive is that here we have a big and dense cooperative movement. Here cooperatives are a consolidated movement, and worker co-ops are a widespread legal form for worker organization. People know what a worker co-op is. People know what a co-op is. However, here platform co-ops are scarce and not yet fully operating, and they don't have much relationships between them. So that's a challenge. And the third contextual element I think it's important is that Argentina is a highly urbanized country with lots of bike lanes in the main cities. And also last year or 2 years ago, there was a survey carried out by the Ministry of Labor with workers of delivery platforms, and more than 70% said that as the main means of transportation, they used bikes. So there is a good context for the arrival of CopCycle, but well, I think that this contextual condition also poses challenges because the the urbanization processes in Latin America have been grounded in broader structural inequalities that generate a lack of services and dispersion of population in the suburbs of the main cities. So although we are a highly urbanized country, we have these problems regarding urbanization processes. Another important factor, there are three more. Another important factor are the organizational resources that provided FACTIC, the Federation of Worker Co-ops. This federation took COPCycle as a strategic project, so lots of resources, political, social, and economical resources are directed to COPCycle. But the challenge is that on the other side of the same process, this project depends too much on the activism and the work paid indirectly by the co-ops, the work of the tech workers that is indirectly paid by the works they are member of. And despite having gained 2 state grants, as I told before, the contribution of the activism and the tech co-ops continue being fundamental. So it is still necessary to consolidate regular and sufficient financing schemes, economic resources, and a business model. Another important element, and I think I would like to discuss this with Callum, is the role of the state that has played a key role in the process, not only because of these two grants, but because of other, well, now we don't have time, but other things that the state has done as administrative resolutions, political aid, lots of meetings, and lots of interest in this process of platform co-ops. And I think that the last important factor is that participating and creating networks with other actors of the social and solidarity economy has been a good thing to open up to political resources, to different type of assistance, to different types of knowledges, and also this provides cooperative clients and cooperative suppliers. Just to finish, I would like to highlight some things we could learn about this Argentinian implementation of COPCycle. We could learn about scaling platform co-ops from this case. First, that states can be allies, and not only allies in each country, but beyond national borders. Why? Because something I didn't say is that with the state grants, COPCycle here in Argentina paid a tech worker that not only worked in the localization of the software, but also joined the international team, which before was only made up of European workers. So the state grant helped sustain a worker for the overall cooperative, or for the overall COPCycle. I hope I've been clear. The second element I think that this process teaches us is that the feasibility conditions of platform co-ops cannot be analyzed by exclusively considering local dimensions. For example, to understand Argentinian process, we need to know that there was an open source software available. And also to understand COPCycle during these last years, we need to know that the Argentinian process contributed a worker, also
para o funcionário, e juntamente com o México e a Argentina contribuímos novas funcionalidades para o software. Então, o COPCycle tem transformado com essas implementações no México e na Argentina. E o terceiro elemento, para se pensar, terceiro e último elemento, sobre trabalho decente e governança, essas implementações permitem o argumento que essas estratégias estendidas, federadas, vão além da Europa para uma plataforma transnacional e solidária.
For example, the open source software triggered implementations beyond Europe and an extended federated strategy with the creation of COPCycle Latin America that still has not a clear space in the governance model, but it has interesting links. Then that there has been lots of collaborative work, as I said, the new functionalities that help not only Argentina and Mexico, but the experience on the whole. Also the growth of the team with this possibility to enhance documentation processes and to incorporate new issues. For example, what to do with data, something that nowadays the platform don't address. And another interesting thing, I think, is that this process has enabled CoopCycle to reframe the ecological agenda, taking into account different contexts and thus opening to the possibility to incorporate other regions beyond Europe. So, well, this is what I wanted to share with you, and thank you very much.
Muito obrigado, Denise. Muito boa a tua apresentação também. Nos faz pensar sobre o Brasil e sobre o que a gente pode fazer juntos por aqui. Agora passo a vez para o professor Nathan Schneider, que é professor da University of Colorado Boulder, na área de Media Studies, é jornalista, um dos editores do livro Hours to Hack and to Own, The Rise of Platform Cooperativism, A New Vision for the Future of Work and the Fairer Internet, coeditado com Trabalho Shows, Everything for Everyone, The Radical Tradition That is Shaping the Next Economy. Recentemente escreveu ótimo artigo para a revista Wired chamado You, Yes, You Would Be a Better Owner for Twitter Than Elon Musk. E depois eu coloco os links aqui no chat. Nathan, seja muito bem-vindo, muito obrigado por estar com a gente.
Thank you so much. Really a pleasure to be here. Such fantastic presentation so far. I mean, that exploration of an international network is just really so important, and I'd love to compare notes with some work we've been doing, collaborators and I, on cooperative networks here, achieving scale through kind of overlapping co-ops. So just fascinating. Also with Callum's work, I share a sense of the importance of political struggle, and hope that what I share here will kind of be understood in that light. To me, the goal that I'm coming to this conversation with is, how do we get cooperatives and spaces of worker self-governance and community self-governance outside the realm of alternatives, outside the realm of small nice to haves, and toward the mainstream of the economy. And so I hope this contribution, this set of proposals based on my work accompanying co-ops and in development for many years, and feeling the frustration of the kind of barriers that they face, both legacy co-ops and newer platform co-ops, is helpful. Forgive my parochialism. I'm going to focus a lot on US history and the US context, but I do so in the hope of helping to spur a global conversation about the horizon of what we should be aspiring toward and demanding. So first of all, I just want to stress, I don't think tech policy or tech governance or tech cooperatives should really be thought of as so separate from other kinds of things. I think actually that limitation would be a mistake in the long run. We need to see things holistically, and I appreciate the way in which Callum puts the conversation, for instance, in the context of a food crisis. Food and tech, are part of the same economy. The accountability lacking in tech has been achieved in certain ways in other sectors. So there are lessons to be learned from our histories, and these are often really histories of struggle, and we need to recognize that. Further, that rather than kind of just tech-specific policy, we see a lot of, when we talk about how should we regulate tech, I tend to think that we again need to recognize that this is not that these problems in tech are connected to problems in other parts of the economy, and the goal here is to generalize access to accountability. So I think a lot of us are kind of familiar with the kind of deep crisis with tech around exploitation of labor and personal data, failures of governance and oversight. I'm not going to belabor that stuff too much here. But what I do want to stress is the way in which the US cooperative sector has been developed. And I invite you all to think about how this kind of story plays out in your context. Capper-Volstead Act in 1922, not the first piece of relevant legislation, but an important one, exempted farmer cooperatives from antitrust law, specific to agricultural cooperatives. Farm Credit Act, same thing. Now there's a $130 billion cooperative bank down the road. It's a result of things emanating from this Farm Credit Act of almost 100 years ago. Again, just for farmers. So our local, restaurant delivery co-op that we had here in Colorado, still have, but just left my region, was not able to benefit at all from that large cooperative bank, that massive financial institution. Federal Credit Union Act, enabling small financial cooperatives. Bottom line on small, this act limited their, it's called field of membership, enabled credit unions to solve financial problems for lots and lots of people, but essentially prevented them from really competing with banks. The Rural Electrification Act, starting in the late 1930s, created a financing mechanism to allow the development of rural electric cooperatives, essentially moving rural America from being 90% not electrified. My grandfather grew up on a farm without electricity, to being fully electrified in about a decade. My grandfather's farm that he grew up on got electricity through a co-op. And then, another example, there are others in the mix, but the employee stock ownership plan, this is not for cooperatives exactly, but it is the most important legislation for enabling employee ownership in the US, but did so under a very constrained mechanism, so that, for instance, it is essentially irrelevant to the tech economy because it requires such specific kinds of conditions that it just is not really applicable in the kinds of economic contexts and business models that are forming in tech. So, what are some lessons from these policies, many of which are very, very powerful and had transformative effects on economic life, particularly for people who had been marginalized from the mainstream economy. One thing that's really important to recognize, I just want to note at the outset, is that a lot of these were part of a picture that involved racist exclusion. So they were part of a colonialist, white supremacist project, and were passed largely as through compromises that excluded particularly Black workers from enjoying a lot of the benefits, not entirely, but from enjoying a lot of the benefits here. So that's something we need to note and keep in mind and resist. But structurally, in addition, is the respect in which each of these enabling policies actually also came with constraints. That their success was carefully limited. And when you look at the history of how these policies were developed, it's not by accident. Investor-owned companies were very, very anxious to prevent cooperative alternatives from meaningfully competing with them, and essentially handed the cooperatives only the sectors of the market that the investors didn't really want very much. And we need to be very, very attentive to the fact that in many respects, the cooperative economy was designed for limited success and widespread failure. It has been designed through policy in many, many countries to be fragmented and constrained. And we often don't see this. And we think of ourselves as, in the cooperative movement, as trying to compete in the mainstream economy. And why is this so hard? Why are we so small? This is by design in so many contexts, and in many countries it's worse. I mean, I remember a slide at a Platform Co-op conference where a presenter from Japan was listing all of the different legislative policies that Japanese cooperatives work under, each one a tiny little straitjacket preventing creativity and imagination. So to me, the question is, how do we unleash economic democracy for everyone? What would it look like to have a policy strategy for cooperative and cooperative governance that actually assumes that cooperatives should be a driving force in the economy, rather than a kind of nice exception on the side? And also this fragmentation, I think, is really important to stress, has frustrated the ability to build powerful cooperative political movements. I've experienced this firsthand here in Colorado. I have worked to organize different sectors of our cooperative economy, which on their own are quite powerful. Our rural electrics, our credit unions, they have trouble even talking to each other because they work with such different policies. So first of all, I argue that we need flexible structures for creative community ownership. This means that when we create, an incorporation statute for, say, platform co-ops, we don't limit it to platform co-ops. We say we want to create statutes that anybody can use for anything to create accountable community ownership. We have an example of that here in Colorado, where our farmers a number of years ago developed a statute called the Limited Cooperative Association. They did it for themselves for agricultural purposes, but because they didn't put that in the law, unlike most cooperative frameworks, their statute has actually become the dominant tool for developing platform co-ops, not just in Colorado, but across the United States. So when you write cooperative statutes, don't limit it just to the thing you're trying to do right now. Develop statutes that can be used creatively. Second, financing. In the past, financing for cooperatives has been limited to very specific buckets, very much in the United States. And so as a result, we were able to, if you're a rural electric co-op of the kind they were building in the 1930s, you've got a very powerful financing utility. You have co-ops that own nuclear power plants. But if you're trying to build a community solar farm, sorry, you're out of luck. They didn't think of that in the 1930s. That's not what they were worried about. We need financing structures that enable community ownership regardless of the sector or the structure. And I think there are some interesting approaches to this. Louis Kelso, who's the creator of the Employee Stock Ownership Plan, proposed over the course of his career a kind of reinsurance, a kind of background financial utility, a public utility that would kind of compel and incentivize the financial industry to see community ownership, worker ownership as something worth investing in, so that it would just make sense. It would be a boring transaction for a bank to enable, workers to become owners of their workplace. If there was a reasonable way of doing so. Right now, that is just not an option in many, many cases, except for some narrow exceptions. Another example, a very recent one, proposed actually by my Senator John Hickenlooper, I think out of naivete. I mean, I talked to, his
Por
staff.
ingenuidade, eu falei com a sua equipe e eles não entendiam a natureza radical da sua proposta, chamado a lei de capital para cooperativas, exigindo que a necessidade de emprestar para cooperativas de vários tipos. Essa é a primeira forma de financiamento cooperativo em forma de lei que eu já vi nos Estados Unidos, que não discrimina sobre o tipo de cooperativa ou o setor em que você trabalha. Então, existe algo radical em dizer, vamos emprestar para cooperativas independente do tipo ou do setor. Isso é o nível de restrição que existe historicamente, que é algo tão simples e algo tão modesto parece ser bastante radical. Esse tipo de estratégia é central para permitir a coordenação das cooperativas. A minha experiência é tentar coordenar essas cooperação entre cooperativas. Isso constantemente é frustrado por termos essa legislação restrita, onde todos protegem o seu próprio feudo e tem pouco incentivo para trabalhar de forma conjunta. Se desenvolvêssemos legislação para cooperativas compartilhadas, isso daria maior incentivo para ter uma frente mais unida e um movimento político mais poderoso. Tem uma observação aqui sobre o contexto italiano, que nos traz muitas lições sobre essa estratégia ampla. podemos ir além do que os italianos já fizeram, mas é um contra-exemplo sobre o qual eu penso bastante, onde as cooperativas estão na Constituição e as associações cooperativas incluem vários modelos e setores da indústria, onde nos Estados Unidos, por exemplo, nossa Associação Nacional de Cooperativas é muito menor do que a Associação Nacional de Cooperativas de Crédito ou Cooperativas Rurais. Nossa base específica, as mais restritas são mais fortes do que as mais amplas nos Estados Unidos. Então, eu sempre argumento que precisamos pensar sobre como criar estruturas amplas, não só estruturas focadas, não só plataformas para cooperativas ou trabalhadores de entrega, mas quando fazemos isso, como podemos assegurar que os ganhos que fazemos nos contextos onde batalhamos são ganhos que podem ser desfrutados de forma ampla por gerações e não presume que você sabe como deve ser uma cooperativa daqui a uma geração. Crie estruturas baseadas em princípios amplos que vão permitir que as cooperativas sejam responsáveis, democráticos e criativos. E, por final, eu quero enfatizar que não basta só auxiliar as cooperativas. Temos uma causa em comum, especialmente com aqueles que trabalham com limites.
Investor ownership has been enabled in ways that are deepening inequalities and exacerbating problems of the digital economy and the economies that we inhabit of all kinds. And so we need to, as we build the cooperative movement, make sure we are also recognizing that the ways in which investor ownership have been enabled are unacceptable, and that the success of the cooperative movement will depend on reducing the ability of investor ownership to play an exploitative and unfair game. Until we insist on those restrictions, we insist on refusing to allow, platform monopolies to be a norm. We are not going to be able to build meaningful cooperative alternatives. Thank you so much. I have a paper kind of outlining some of these ideas. It's actually no longer a draft, published in the same link works, but is published by Oxford University Press last year in a volume. Thank you so much. One thing just to highlight is I'm now working with Donut Economics Lab in the UK to think about a kind of more specific policy strategy implementing some of these ideas. So very eager for feedback and thoughts from those here. So thank you for hearing me out, and I look forward to the rest of the conversation.
Muito obrigado, Nathan. Interessante também as suas perspectivas sobre questões de governança e de comunidades para o cooperativismo de plataforma. E agora a gente passa para a professora Julice Salvagini, a professora do Departamento de Administração e do Programa de Políticas Públicas da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Sul, pesquisadora do projeto Fairwork Brasil e coordenadora do grupo Gestações. Tem pesquisado historicamente relações de trabalho e gênero, e agora recentemente acabou de ter um financiamento aprovado para pesquisar o movimento dos trabalhadores sem teto no Brasil e o cooperativismo de plataforma. A Julice vai comentar um pouco sobre as questões do projeto Fairwork, e vai também atuar como uma debatedora, já trazendo algumas perguntas para o painel, para a gente aquecer as discussões, e pedir para a audiência, quem quiser colocar as perguntas no chat ou no botão Q&A, por favor, coloquem, que daqui a pouco a gente começa a rodada de perguntas. Bom dia, Julice, muito bom estar com você por aqui.
Bom dia a todos, a todas. Fico muito feliz com o convite, muito honrada de fazer parte dessa mesa. Já aprendi muito, né, com todas essas explanações. Acho que cada trouxe questões, olhares, né, muito variados que para a gente, enfim, engrandece muito o debate, né? Gostaria muito de agradecer ao Rafael, especialmente, né, por me oportunizar estar aqui representando a UFRGS, representando também o Fairwork Brasil. Eu queria falar brevemente, né, assim como o Callum, de um contexto nacional que nós temos, né, um pouco da realidade do Brasil, um pouco da realidade do cooperativismo de plataforma no Brasil, e aí passar para essas questões de debate, tá? Enfim, então nós tivemos o relatório do Fairwork, que né, já tem o link ali no chat, divulgado agora em março, que tem apontado o Brasil como um dos piores índices, né, em termos dos indicadores do trabalho decente. Então, as plataformas do Brasil têm agido de maneira muito deletéria no que diz respeito a ampliar né, aquilo que a gente já tinha, né, num contexto muito precário das condições de trabalho. Então, o que a gente tem observado, né, com base na ação dessas plataformas, né, é a ascensão da informalidade, né, de contextos de informalidade, de contextos de extrema insegurança, de contextos de alta da competitividade das pessoas, e tudo isso, né, dentro de um cenário de perdas constantes de direitos, né? Com base, então, nos critérios do próprio Fairwork Brasil, o que a gente vê, então, são trabalhadores e trabalhadoras cada vez mais à mercê de remunerações completamente insuficientes, né, muitas vezes abaixo do próprio salário mínimo, com jornadas exaustivas de trabalho, sem qualquer dimensão contratual, né, para que possa ter alguma segurança dos seus trabalhos, né, sem ter condições de responsabilização por parte das empresas, né, no caso de acidentes de trabalho, no caso de perdas materiais, né, sendo que os trabalhadores são cada vez mais, ou são responsáveis, os únicos responsáveis, né, pelos seus equipamentos de trabalho e por si próprios, né, a gente vê que não tem nenhuma condição, assim, em termos de gestão, né, de clarificar quais são as regras dessas plataformas ditas convencionais, né, acerca dos bloqueios, né, desses trabalhadores das plataformas, e a gente vê que também não estão asseguradas condições de associações dos trabalhadores, seja por sindicatos e etc., né? Com base nisso, a gente tem conseguido compreender que o Brasil, né, assim como os outros países da América Latina, e reflexo, né, como a gente tem ouvido falar dessas plataformas ao redor do mundo, tem enfrentado um cenário, né, um contexto de esgotamento, né? Então, a gente tem identificado um contexto de esgotamento do próprio modelo econômico, que tem chegado, né, ao que a gente considera assim, um limite intransponível em termos de não ter mais, ou a gente não consegue imaginar para onde seria, né, intensificada essa exploração do trabalho, que já total, completa, né, um contexto de esgotamento para além, coloca o trabalhador para além da condição de cansaço, né, ou coloca numa posição de estagnação, né, do ponto de vista dele não conseguir mais sequer reagir, né, àquele cenário devastador de precarização que ele coloca, né. Contraditoriamente, né, ou paradoxalmente, esse mesmo contexto de esgotamento que fere, né, tanto as questões de saúde física e emocional do trabalhador, também têm sido vislumbradas como uma possibilidade de ação. Então, esse mesmo contexto de esgotamento é o que tem provocado algumas das mobilizações de trabalhadores, no Brasil, sobretudo, de entregadores e de motoristas por aplicativo, e que tem levado depois à criação de movimentos em prol do cooperativismo de plataforma. Então, essas mobilizações, né, esse esgotamento é o mesmo que que é tão prejudicial ao trabalhador, mas que também, lá pelas tantas, nós compreendemos que o faz agir, né? E aí, nesse contexto da plataformização do trabalho, e que são colocados, né, premissas assim, que se instaura, né, com base numa premissa de uma mudança tecnológica, política e social, né, de um contexto em que há essas três esferas de mudança, eu queria destacar especialmente as questões políticas e sociais para a manutenção, né, ou para o desenvolvimento do cooperativismo de plataforma, como não só uma alternativa a essas plataformas, né, ditas capitalistas, mas, sobretudo, como também um movimento de mostrar, né, a insatisfação, de se mobilizar contra aquilo que tá acontecendo, né, massivamente. Então, falando do ponto de vista das políticas públicas, com base nas análises que a gente tem do cooperativismo de plataforma no Brasil, a gente consegue compreender que são necessárias ações, primeiro, de uma regulamentação do trabalho a nível geral, né, do ponto de vista internacional, inclusive, para que se tenha parâmetros de concorrência que não tenham essa marca assim, tão desleal como a gente vê hoje, né? As cooperativas do Brasil não têm conseguido, muitas vezes, se colocar, porque as suas condições de trabalho fazem com que o preço, né, assim como no restante dos países, se torne muito acima, né, do mercado, e isso nós entendemos que políticas de regulamentação poderiam ajudar a resolver. Num outro ponto que também vocês falaram, eu queria ressaltar a característica aqui do Brasil de empreendimentos ainda pequenos, né? E que, por mais que tenham a intenção de instaurar todas essas dimensões do trabalho decente, muitas vezes não conseguem, porque é um número muito pequeno de pessoas e não tem o recurso suficiente, né? Por isso a importância, e eu queria reforçar as falas também de vocês, de se constituir essas redes de cooperação para que possa ter uma estrutura, né, que garanta certo suporte para todas as cooperativas. Outra questão em torno das políticas públicas em si, nós consideramos a importância de ações que permitam acesso ao capital, especialmente ao capital inicial, para que essas pessoas possam se consolidar ali no início, né, possam constituir os seus empreendimentos, porque o que a gente vê são grupos com intenções de cooperar, de ter os seus coletivos, né, de buscar essas saídas democráticas para o trabalho de plataforma, mas que não conseguem sequer ter os seus instrumentos de trabalho ali básicos para começar essa iniciativa, né. Outro ponto seriam bases, né, de consultas e de acesso a informações sobre as questões burocráticas, né. Pelo menos no Brasil, a gente tem um contexto de uma burocratização muito grande para a formalização dessas empresas, né, ou dessa modalidade, né, para todas, mas especialmente, né, para essa modalidade de empreendedorismo, e o que torna muito difícil, né, as pessoas terem acesso a questões contábeis ou mesmo jurídicas. Então, a gente entende que uma rede nesse sentido, né, também para ajuda dessas cooperativas seria muito interessante, né. Aí eu queria falar também, e aí depois já encaminhar as minhas questões, um pouco da questão social, né, ou de algumas premissas sociais para que se tenha um engajamento dessas pessoas nessa outra economia, né, que são essas iniciativas democráticas, né. O que a gente tem visto, também com base no caso brasileiro, é que essas cooperativas, do ponto de vista das suas origens, apesar de elas serem colocadas, né, dentro de um universo digital, e que não é global, mas que é internacional, né, elas têm se criado com base em arranjos locais. Então, são grupos, na maior parte das vezes, que têm laços, né, que constituíram laços por esses ou outros motivos, seja por essas questões das reivindicações, das próprias mobilizações dos trabalhadores de plataformas convencionais, seja porque eram grupos que se constituíam em outras atividades de mercado, ou grupos de amigos, grupos locais de bairro, né? Mas a gente vê que esses grupos partem de arranjos muito locais, né? E de lugares, especialmente, que se tem uma história pregressa de cooperação, né? Que se tem outros tipos de iniciativas cooperadas, né? Então, surgem de contextos sociais de cooperação, e aí eu queria puxar o debate também para essa questão. Com base nisso, nós nos perguntamos quais são os princípios de solidariedade, né? Quais são as noções, especialmente também, e aí perto daquilo que o Nathan falava, né? Do antigo cooperativismo, como se fosse, né? Quais são as noções do cooperativismo dito tradicional que podem integralizar esse nosso debate, né? Que podem ser pensadas do ponto de vista agora da Constituição das plataformas, né? Então, nós entendemos que uma rede do cooperativismo deve ser fortalecida não só no que diz respeito ao cooperativismo de plataforma, né? Mas também de modo aliado, né? Aos movimentos integrados já do cooperativismo e que são, de alguma maneira, consolidados, né? Em muitas partes, por exemplo, do Brasil. E aí eu passo já para algumas questões, né, que possam nos ajudar a debater, né? O que eu acho importante pensar? Como é que a gente pode difundir todos esses processos, todos esses pressupostos, né, de solidariedade num contexto virtual, né? Como é que todas essas relações que são de solidariedade e que a gente vê no Brasil que acontecem, apesar de se constituírem em plataformas digitais, que acontecem localmente, como é que a gente transpõe essas noções de solidariedade para um nível internacional, né? Como é que a gente conecta essas pessoas de maneira distantes do ponto de vista geográfico, né? Dentro de um sistema de ajuda mútua, né? Como que a gente pode garantir essas dimensões do trabalho decente, e aí o Fairwork vai trabalhar com base, né, nos princípios da Organização Internacional do Trabalho, os 5 princípios do trabalho decente, em grupos que ainda têm uma constituição informal, né? Como é que a gente cria redes internacionais para tentar difundir e garantir ajuda mútua em termos do trabalho decente para esses trabalhadores, né? E um outro ponto aí de uma discussão de um viés um pouco mais ideológico, como é que a gente faz a coalizão de diferentes iniciativas, né, todas dentro do cooperativismo de plataforma, mas dentro da sua perspectiva plural, inscrita em diferentes matrizes ideológicas, né, que por vezes parecem assim, tudo a mesma coisa, mas não é, né? A gente tem debates que vão se acentuando para propostas, práticas, às vezes bastante distintas. Enfim, acho que tem uma série de questões para a gente avançar e discutir essa manhã, claro que sem a pretensão, né, de encerrar esse debate, que é muito promissor ainda, né, que está ainda em ascensão e que vai demandar tanto da gente, né, num olhar multidisciplinar, a perspectiva de continuidade daqui para frente. Então, essa seria mais ou menos assim, a minha indicação de debate, e agradeço muito a oportunidade de participar com vocês nessa manhã, e agora, então, começamos a discussão.
Beleza, muito obrigado, Julice. Eu vou direcionar algumas perguntas da Julice e deixo vocês à vontade antes de passar para as perguntas da audiência. Eu acho que a primeira questão que salta aos olhos são a questão dos laços de solidariedade transnacionais, né? Eu acho que cada um de vocês, por perspectivas diferentes, não só dentro do cooperativismo de plataforma, tem abordagens nisso. Algo que eu venho me perguntando, e eu não tenho claro isso, por um lado, o projeto Fairwork incluiu nos seus princípios atualizados a governança democrática como um princípio de representação justa do trabalho por plataforma. Por outro, eu ainda não sei como que os indicadores que foram pensados para avaliar grandes plataformas de trabalho hegemônicas, de que maneiras que elas serviriam para avaliar plataformas cooperativas, e de que maneira que esses princípios se relacionariam. Uma coisa que eu acho muito interessante dessas perspectivas de vocês quatro, e infelizmente não temos a Rahel aqui também, que entende bastante de governança e autogestão e questões de horizontalidade, de diferenças entre vocês, tanto do ponto de vista de como enxergam esse movimento, como também em termos de localização e de como pensam. Eu acho muito oportuna a provocação da Denise, que traz no próprio texto dela, de reprovincializar a Europa, e de pensar essas territorializações, algo que a gente já tem discutido em outros debates aqui neste painel. Dito isso, abro para vocês fazerem uma rodada breve de 5 minutinhos para ou vocês responderem essas provocações, ou fazerem outras perguntas para os outros colegas, ou trazerem questões em aberto para vocês. Eu acho que isso também é importante para a gente, de dúvidas que vocês mesmos tenham em relação a tudo isso, e em seguida, depois dessa breve rodada, a gente responde as perguntas da audiência que estão aí no chat e no Q&A. Callum, é contigo.
Thanks so much, Raphael, and thank you to all the other panelists. It's been a fascinating discussion. Really taken part. I want to kind of answer a little bit of what you were saying there, Raphael, and tie that in with one of the audience questions that was asked earlier. So in terms of the Fairwork principles, I mean, alongside Raphael and Julice, I also work on Fairwork. My role in the project is more looking at the development of a new set of principles around AI, looking specifically at the role of artificial intelligence in the workplace, and looking slightly broader than just the platform economy to address the phenomena of algorithmic management in general. So I'm not necessarily as deeply involved with the work on a national basis as you guys are. I do have some experience in the UK report. But I think what's really important to bear in mind with the Fairwork project is that the principles that we have codified there, that the kind of 10 scoring points, are the very basic minimum of what we think any platform should be getting to be even slightly considered fair. So, you know, a 7 out of 10 is not really a good score. A 10 out of 10 is like you're clearing the bar. Now you're even in, we can start to talk about fair work, right? But until you're getting 10 out of 10, you're not even there. So I think when we're asking questions of like, how can we apply, like, should these principles apply to co-ops in the same way they should apply to large platforms? I think we can say, yeah, every single cooperative should be getting 10 out of 10, right? Like if they're not getting 10 out of 10, that's a real issue. We work in the UK here with PedalMe, which is an interesting business that's attempting to use a more ethical model. And I think they're going to score, the report isn't out yet, but they'll score very well this year. And so that's an interesting example of how a platform that goes out there and deliberately attempts to meet high ethical standards can do these things. And so we should be seeing platforms that are scored as part of this be getting 10 out of 10. And that should be demonstrating, you know, the real tangible difference between large exploitative platforms and some of these cooperative models, and the really important differentiations in what it's like to work for each of them. I think this ties back into a question that was asked in the chat earlier about the role of sometimes cooperatives in different national legislative frameworks have lower thresholds in terms of legal requirements around work. And that means that the cooperative model is kind of used cynically by private employers to lower standards. Now, I think the questioner said that this was the case in Brazil. I'm not familiar with that, but I know certainly in the Italian logistics industry, this is rife, right? So people might be familiar with the union CCOBAS. In the Italian logistics industry, they've organized workers, mostly migrants, to improve wages and conditions in that sector. And what's remarkable when you read about CCOBAS, I've talked to members of the union, is that they're primarily organizing against cooperatives, right? Because these kind of cooperatives, name only, use the structure because under Italian law, you're allowed a lower threshold of, you know, you can pay lower than minimum wage, you can avoid sectoral collective agreements in some ways, et cetera, et cetera. So I think this is a really important point for us, is that the standards here, you know, we shouldn't be allowing for that kind of exceptionalism. We have to have a kind of a universal basic set of standards that apply across both cooperatives and private industries. That there shouldn't be, I think, a strong differentiation. Both should have the same minimum wages, should have the same holiday and sick pay requirements, and so on. I don't know, Nathan, you probably know the history of this, of how we ended up with legislatures treating cooperatives in quite such a different way. But to me, it's fundamentally irrational and probably politically quite reactionary. I also want to, I think Nathan's point about the need to design things or design some of the measures we pursue now in general. Obviously, I'm coming to this with very much my food hat on, but I think one of the most interesting discussions we're having in the UK at the moment about the future of social policy is talking about things like universal basic services and really thinking about the provision of a number of different currently commodified needs in decommodified ways. So that might be access to the internet, for instance. How can we provide access to the internet free and universally? Access to food is just another part of that conversation. So for us, I think that really does strike me as one of the key questions here. How can we think about the role of cooperatives, not just in one part of universal basic services, just in the food provision part of that, but how can we think of the role of cooperatives as an ownership structure across all of those different needs that have been identified, be they food, internet, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, the internet one stands out to me because there really strikes me as a parallel with the rural electrification example. But yeah, I think that those are both, to me, important points. First, that we shouldn't allow for lower standards because of different ownership models. We have to have basic minimums, and they have to be a significant level. And secondly, that yeah, when we're striving for developments in this space and new policy ideas and new ways of organizing cooperatives on both a national and transnational level and integrating them with the state in some ways, that we should be thinking in a broad sense about how we can apply that across different domains.
Great. Thank you so much, Callum. Denise?
Well, I have some points. First, I wanted to add some information that perhaps could be useful to discuss with Callum and Nathan. To Callum, I wanted to let him know, to tell him about CopCycle here in Argentina, that it has something to do with what you said about the food crisis and the food system. Here, the worker co-ops are at pilot stages. So the team is working a lot to articulate with local governments. And one of the ideas was to articulate in order for these co-ops to deliver food or medicine to vulnerable sectors. So the state being the client, let's say. So these are conversations for the time being, but already some problems had arose. First, or the most important one, is when we talk about delivery, the size and the weight of the packages, because with food delivery here, food delivery in general is vegetables and fruits, and they are very big packages. So how to create a system to enable this? But well, for the medicine, this wouldn't be a problem because this is smaller, so that wouldn't be a problem. But well, when you talked about these ideas, I wanted to tell you that there has been here some conversations to work directly with the governments as clients with these kinds of deliveries. And also the team here is trying to shape like cared environments for co-ops, as you said, to space creation by the state. Well, in this case, it would be like the Worker Co-ops Federation trying to shape, we say, a socio-economic circuit where co-ops can grow, but with cared environments, with social and solidarity clients, with social and solidarity suppliers and demands. And with Nathan, I wanted to tell him what does he think about what I said, that here in Argentina, the legal framework is not a barrier. We don't have a specific legal framework for multi-stakeholder co-ops, but there is a model for geographic districts that could be adapted. And perhaps instead of geographic districts, each district will be for consumers, for users, for workers. But although this model exists, there is no experience of adapting it for platforms or for new experiences of multi-stakeholder co-ops. So I wanted to know, what do you think about perhaps this resistance to adapt? Sometimes we expect very specific laws or rulings to act. And well, so you said from the state or from society, we should struggle for flexible structures. So what happens when perhaps there is or there is resistance, or there is not enough knowledge to adapt them? And then some of the questions I read or I heard, one about the possibility of sharing models between countries to scale. And well, I think it is positive and possible. For example, right now we are working together with Mexico because they are like in a phase of closing a pilot stage. So they are observing the interviews with the delivery co-ops, and we are learning a lot from what the delivery co-ops there have identified as problems, tensions, and things to improve. So here in Argentina, that we are a step before, that information is really important. And also what I told about the new functionalities. One of them which was designed in Mexico is cash payment, and that new functionality for us in Argentina was very important to have cash payment in the platform. And also I think that it is also very important for Europe, because having that new functionality perhaps helps Europe to think about the global south inside Europe also, those sectors who also need the cash payment to use these platforms. So I think it's really positive and productive. And then there was another question about data. And as far as I know, CoopCycle does not collect data, does not analyze data. And I think that it is part of a decision, but also it's a consequence of a lack of resources, economic and human resources, let's say people working. So I think it's important to have more people involved in these projects. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Nathan?
Thank you for these comments. And there's so much in what you all are saying. I mean, I think it's important to recognize historically, again, part of this like intentional limitation of the cooperative model has been to say cooperatives should be nice little local organizations. And again, they've been actively prevented from achieving broader scale than that. And I think there's been sometimes a failure of imagination where as cooperatives, we see, when we meet together, it's kind of like, how are you doing in your place? How are you doing in your place? Rather than how can we build networks that make us all a lot more powerful and enable us to provide really meaningful counterpower to investor-owned transnational businesses. We do scale differently, and we need to recognize the incredible power we have in doing scale in a cooperative fashion. I think the co-op example or the co-op cycle example that Denise offered, I think is, really fascinating model of that in recognizing how these different cooperative units can work together. And that's something I've been exploring as well. I've been, in some respects, actually kind of skeptical about the reliance in the platform co-op universe on the multi-stakeholder structure. I'm kind of waiting and seeing position on that. I am a little concerned that too much multi-stakeholderism will produce too much complexity at the business level, and that actually having just pure worker ownership, where worker ownership needs to be there, and then having, additional kinds of structures like worker ownership alongside, consumer-owned credit unions or business-owned purchasing co-ops is something that I've been really interested in lately. I recently did a case study on an example here in Colorado built out of a worker co-op called Namaste Solar. And they, rather than building complex multi-stakeholder structures within the business, they have a bunch of single stakeholder businesses that are all cooperatives that work together, but with different stakeholder structures. And I think that kind of thing might have some serious advantages over multi-stakeholder structures. That said, I do think we can, there are certain cases where, a multi-stakeholder cooperative makes sense, and we should work to enable those kinds of structures to happen. In the case in Colorado, if it's of any use, it occurred not because platform cooperative people demanded it, but because already existing powerful legacy cooperatives wanted a bit more flexibility, and they created a structure not really to enable multi-stakeholder cooperatives, but they created a flexible enough structure so that multi-stakeholder co-ops could be created within it. So this is an opportunity, I think, to interact with the legacy cooperative businesses that might have much more political power than worker-based platform co-ops, to figure out, hey, is there any common ground? Can we identify strategies where something that will work for you will also enable us to grow much more? Again, when we talk about scale, it doesn't have to be at the level of one business getting really big. That's what venture capitalists, that's what investor owners really want. What I see as really successful cooperative scale is when you're able to, use thin layers to do economies of scale. Co-op cycle is a great example of this, and then use small human scaled local entities, and you're able to expand on that basis. One other piece in terms of legislation that's really important and is still really missing is building co-ops for international membership. And I'm not sure exactly what the best way to do this is right now. I think of an example like Stockse United, which has members in 70 countries, photographers, videographers, artists, and they've really, really struggled with Canadian co-op law for having all those members and treating them fairly, because there are expectations about having a certain number of Canadians on the board and that sort of thing. And so I think I would love to have more of a discussion about how we are going to legally handle international cooperative membership. One context I've been engaged in that too is around cryptocurrency and blockchain and DAOs. This is one strategy where a kind of internationalism becomes possible because you're not relying in the same way on local legal statutes. Finally, to Callum's point, I fully agree that using cooperatives as a exception to labor law is deeply problematic and should be resisted at all costs. I think those kinds of exemptions are part of the broader narrative and strategy in which cooperatives are being treated as like the cute little alternative on the side, or something that is an alternative rather than the mainstream. And I think we need to demand both, the treatment, the high standards for cooperative labor, but recognizing that in order to do that, we need to demand capital access. We need to demand power. We need to demand the ability to meet those standards. So often cooperatives have been given exceptions because they are not really able to compete in the market. So they say, okay, you don't have capital access, so therefore you don't have to pay your workers as much. Rather than tolerating that, we should say, no, we want to pay our workers even better, and we deserve and demand fair capital access so that we can actually operate in this economy. And by the way, we want to demand that those investor owners are no longer able to get away with the nonsense they get away with. We just lost our delivery co-op here in the town I live in, not because it wasn't working. The business was working, the restaurants loved it. Finally, they saw a delivery business, a platform delivery business that actually made sense to them from a business perspective, to the restaurants, to the workers, everybody. But we had investor-owned companies that are, the big ones, Uber and so forth, that were undercutting the prices and the conditions up against those, those cooperative models. And so the cooperative withdrew because it just couldn't compete with the unfair play of the investor owners. So I'll leave it there. We need to demand and expect cooperatives not to be a kind of lowly exception in the economy. We need to demand and expect that they become a powerful norm.
Thank you so much, Nathan. Now we will have a little break, or 2 minutes break for translation purposes. A little break. Em português, a gente vai fazer 2 minutos de intervalo entre as falas para o tradutor fazer pequeno intervalo. Meanwhile, if you can take a water too, or a coffee. For the translator, I think it's a learning process about our cooperative process with our experiences now. Some information. The next panel will be May 28 on free and open technologies in platform co-ops, with some tech co-ops around the world. And in the end of June, we will have an in-presence event on platform cooperativism and public policies in Porto Alegre, here at the Unicinos University, and we will send the information soon for you. And yeah, Danielle will be back soon. Drink some water, and it's okay. Yeah, feel free, Nathan. And good play for a kid. Danielle has back. And in the end of our final panel, I will ask to Danielle share with us your learnings. Thank you, Danielle. Well, we'll back to Julice, and then we can answer some questions from the audience. Julice?
Não, meu comentário será muito breve, mas assim, mais para falar quando que a gente vê esses movimentos, né, crescentes em torno do cooperativismo, também parece que se proliferam, assim, né, ao mesmo tempo as falsas cooperativas, ou enfim, que a gente acaba tendo contextos, muitas vezes, de cooperativas que não seguem os princípios, efetivamente, de um trabalho democrático, enquanto que isso acaba sendo um pouco perigoso e danoso também para o próprio conceito do cooperativismo, né? Então, acho que a gente precisa se manter atentos e fortes e sempre buscando ter critérios claros do que a gente entende por trabalho decente, inclusive dentro dessa perspectiva do cooperativismo de plataforma. Eu só queria fazer um comentário muito breve, especialmente ao Callum, sobre essa questão da crise do alimento que ele retratou, né, que a gente vive um contexto muito semelhante, né, no sentido de crises generalizadas, né, na realidade brasileira. Mas eu queria só falar de um projeto, de um movimento social, que é esse movimento que eu acompanho, do Movimento dos Trabalhadores Sem Teto, né, que é o MTST, que tem um projeto chamado Cozinha Solidária, e que tem oferecido marmitas de maneira gratuita, né, alguns pratos de comida tem distribuído de forma gratuita entre os trabalhadores, especialmente entregadores e motoristas por aplicativo. Então, são essas questões, especialmente no contexto político que a gente está agora no Brasil, em que muitas vezes a gente não consegue a implementação de políticas públicas, né, adequadas às questões que nós estamos vivendo. Essas mobilizações dos movimentos sociais têm sido muito importantes, né? Pelo menos do que a gente tem conseguido observar. É claro que ainda há muito a ser feito, né? Mas só falar um pouco assim, né, de como esses movimentos têm ajudado aqui no Brasil nesse sentido.
Thanks, Julice. I will summarize some of the questions. The first of all is a question from Jonas Valente, a new postdoc researcher from our Fairwork team. And welcome again to Fairwork team, Jonas. Jonas asks, do you see a risk of big platforms using cooperativism models to bypass work legislations and obligations? In Brazil, co-ops experience few worker protection obligations, and this is used by firms to adopt precarious arrangements. And I will summarize other questions. The second is around the potentialities and limits of transnational movements. I think you already answered some of these questions on transnational. The third is very interesting. I don't remember. From Carol Blooming, about what's the role of researchers and university and academic researchers on the process of development platform co-ops and to help solidarity among workers. And the fourth question is around differences around global South and global North regarding platform labor and platform co-ops. I will start with Nathan because of play and kids issues. So feel free to answer some of the questions or only one, which you prefer.
Thanks for that. On the question of researchers, in some respects, I worry that we're like overstudying, I am as guilty of this as anybody, having helped, organize some of the early conferences on this stuff and drawing a lot of researchers in. But sometimes it seems to me like I have been reminded when I encounter some of our more effective entrepreneurs who are building these things in the streets, as well as union organizers. They think about these things sometimes differently than we do as researchers. We come in with our theoretical concepts of how things should work, and sometimes making things work requires a kind of scrappiness and creativity and imagination that researchers aren't trained with, but that we can learn a lot from. And so I would just really caution researchers against, and again, this is, speaking to myself as much as anybody else, against telling people what to do in the streets, but really deeply listening and wherever possible, directing resources, toward people who are taking risks and putting their livelihoods on the line to enable these things to happen, and being really upfront with them that, if you're building building platform co-ops, if you're building these kinds of models, you are working against the grain, and you are, you're in some respects putting yourself, you're taking risks that we as researchers might not be taking. So we just need to be very conscious of that, be very anxious about how we judge people who are exposing themselves to risk in ways that we as researchers are not. On the point of international solidarity, I think that is so critical. I historically have been really moved by the ways in which, for instance, when Frederick Douglass was who was a famous escaped slave in the 19th century in the United States, when he was on the run from the person who claimed to own him, he went to England to be among the cooperative movement. Those were the people who gave him harbor. And I hope that I don't see a lot of that kind of radicalism in this movement today. And I hope that we can, reclaim it in terms of our relationship across borders and seeing cooperatives as spaces of deep solidarity and of refuge. Thank you.
Thank you, Nathan. Denise, if you.
Well, I share lots of the opinions of Nathan. I think that researchers and universities as institutions should direct resources, and I think that it is when Nathan said listening, I remembered one workshop we did together with the workers of CoopCycle here in Argentina, well, the members of the tech worker co-ops, and me and some other colleagues of the university, that I think that the most interesting output was the exchange of different knowledges. So all of us could learn from the place of the other person. And I think that in particular, perhaps from the universities, we can provide, as Nathan said, people in the platform co-ops are working every day, are worried about that. So perhaps we can give like broader scenarios. We can provide experiences from other places and give some perspective sometimes. For example, what I'm thinking about when I say perspective, here the FACTIC team last year was worried because of the difficulties and the long times to advance the pilot worker co-ops. So we gathered and talked about the process in France, and we thought together about this chronology I shared, that the software was created in 2017, that 1 hour later the first assembly was carried out, then 2 years later the federation was shaped, and then that 1 year later it was elected the first board. So I think that sharing that chronology was useful for the Argentinian team to put the local experience in the broader perspective. So I think this exchange of knowledges is key to advance the processes, and as an institution, not in the practice, but as an institution to provide resources. Then another question was about the labor rights in the platform co-ops, if I understood, and the digital traditional platforms. Here in Argentina, there is a problem that, as the question said, workers in worker co-ops don't have the same rights as employees. So they don't have the same social security. That's a problem we have that is beyond platform co-ops. So I don't think that right now this legal figure is being used to take advantage of this difference. On the contrary, is something that workers try to change and try to struggle for. So we have this difference, but it's not something that is being used to take advantage. And the third question about the Global South and the Global North with respect to, I think, to platform co-ops, I think that, well, as I said at the beginning, now in general, the platforms are being created in the Global North. And I think that in the Global South, if we can say like that, we have to be attentive in the ways that those platforms arrive. I think that the key is that we don't have to think about replication, but we have to think about adaptation and context. So I think that would be the differences.
Excellent. Julice, if you can share some answers too.
Eu bem breve, assim, só falar assim, um pouco sobre a questão da limitação, né, da academia em relação a essas questões, porque compartilhando assim com um pouco, né, do que já dizia a Denise também, nós temos todo esse cuidado em ouvir as pessoas e tentar nos aproximar e criar alguns conceitos, e nós tentamos, né, chegar a algumas diretrizes a respeito do cooperativismo de plataforma, tentando essa interlocução, mas ainda assim a questão prática ainda é também desafiadora para nós, né? Muitas vezes nós somos, inclusive, reivindicados, mas o que a academia pode fazer, como é que a academia pode contribuir, e a gente sabe que aquilo que falta para as cooperativas é algo caro em todos os contextos, né? É um produto que está ali sendo comercializado e que tem um preço e que a gente também não tem acesso, né? Então, enfim, acho que é importante a gente manter esses estudos, manter essas redes de colaboração internacional e exercer, né, essa função não só da pesquisa, mas da pesquisa social, de pressionar por melhorias e né, buscar contribuir da nossa forma, né, para a constituição de políticas públicas e para dar suporte às mobilizações, né, aos movimentos que têm surgido.
Thanks, Julice. I take this opportunity before introduce again Callum to talk about notes from below, the interesting thing that Callum is part, and Callum is an advocate of workers' inquiry in platform labor context in terms of the role of researchers on that. Callum?
Yeah, you took the words out of my mouth. I've not managed to send the correct link in the chat, but give me 1 second and I will send a correct link. So yeah, as Rafael said, myself and some other colleagues are very heavily involved in this Notes from Below project, which has been going for a significant amount of time now. And we take an approach inspired by Italian Marxism, talking about workers' inquiry, where we really view the role of the researcher as basically to be a co-participant in movements with the people, the organizations that we're studying alongside. So the idea is to use research not as a kind of an external microscope with which to focus on other people and what they're doing, but instead to like look at the activities we're taking part in and understand movements from the inside, really, and understand workplaces alongside workers rather than understanding them from kind of the high point of science looking down on these strange little worker ants. I'd really encourage people to look at that. We've also written a paper with Cy Engler and Jamie Woodcock on digital workerism, which might have something that people find of interest. And the perspective of my book is also that of a workers' inquiry. I worked at DigiLabour after my master's degree, and that's where I kind of gathered the ethnographic data. So I'm very much an advocate for workers taking an active role in research and researchers taking an active role in movements, right? That we should overlap as much as possible. Concretely, what does that mean? I mean, during my PhD research, I spent a lot of time talking about ideas with the workers I was also studying. We did like Marx working groups where we'd go and read like chapters of Capital and then discuss them together, which was kind of brilliant. And I think trying to imagine the most horizontal possible relationship between researcher and subject is a really good way, both to get incredible levels of access, but also to understand things from the perspective of the workers themselves. And wherever possible, I think we have a responsibility. Part of what Notes from Below does is really try and raise the voice of workers who are facing these things on the front line, and their organic analyses often capture complexities that we don't necessarily get as researchers. And often, you know, I don't want to come off as a kind of an advocate of grounded theory, but the organic interpretation of the workplace as seen by the worker is often an asset of great value and a source of hugely important qualitative data that I would really emphasize the need to pay attention to. And that, of course, echoes with what other people have been saying. But I guess in this context, it might lead us to say, how would we like our research questions in this area to be shaped? Well, should we just go to platform cooperatives and ask them, what do you need to know to scale up, right? Like, what information is essential to you to do a better job of growing? And how can we give you that information as quickly and as effectively as possible? Because, businesses have huge informational need. Cooperatives have a huge need to know what's going on in their environment. And let's find out what people need and give it to them as quickly as possible, because the growth of these cooperatives is obviously a hugely positive process that all of us want to see accelerate. And so, slightly less of the impartial observer element and slightly more of the movement participant, I think it is really important sometimes. And now I don't have to go to baseball. I don't have the brilliantly American excuse, but it is English football's cup final today. So I need to go and watch the cup final if I'm allowed.
Great. And in Brazil, we have some football plays too, and I think in Argentina too. So it's very okay. A quick note to end. Radon theory, I think it's inspired by functionalist approach, but the social ontology from Lukács and other Marxian approach on ontology understand the science born from life, and so in that is in the work of inquiry, it's a strong approach to that. And I really appreciate workers and researchers as co-authors of papers and so on. It's very interesting. I will talk now in Portuguese to finish this really great presentation. Muito obrigado a todo mundo. Hoje o tradutor também vai ficar feliz porque conseguimos terminar na hora pela primeira vez nessas 3 apresentações. Agradeço muito a todo mundo que esteve até aqui. Um ótimo sábado para vocês que têm acompanhado a gente. A gente se encontra novamente no último evento online do dia 28 de maio, às 10 da manhã, para discutir tecnologias livres e cooperativismo de plataforma com pesquisadores e cooperativas de tecnologia que têm trabalhado nessa questão. Muito obrigado, Julice, Callum, Denise, Daniel e todo mundo que está por aí. Obrigado. Nice.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Have a nice
Tchau, bom
day.
dia a todos. Obrigada. Prazer conhecê-los.